Welcome to the Royal Institution. I'm Susan Greenfield, the director, and here I am hosting this event virtually. You may not have been to the Royal Institution before, but I hope you're already impressed by these beautiful Grade 1 listed buildings, and perhaps also by the much more modern interactive spaces that are the other half of the building. Since it was founded in 1799, the Royal Institution has had this mission to diffuse science for the common purposes of life, which sounds very grand, but actually is something that's very important and really never more so than today. And that is, if you like, to democratize science, to enable people that aren't scientists to come and sit and listen and think and talk about the impact of science and technology and how it's changing your life and the life of your children and eventually perhaps even your grandchildren. And in fact, the events that have been held here, certainly in the 19th century, were so popular that there was congestion of the carriages and we had the first one-way street in London, dubious claim to fame. What's important to know about the Royal Institution is that we are free of any government funding. On the one hand, this means we have no money, but on the other hand, the marvellous advantage is that we can host and discuss and provide a forum for any kind of subjects, however controversial, so long as there is an impartial and balanced view that people can come and look at and access and talk about and share in. So that's what the Royal Institution is. It's a unique place, free of any government agenda, where anyone can come and think and talk about science, they can challenge scientists, and where we can celebrate science in all its aspects, from our Science Media Centre, through our Young Persons Programme, through to the original research in nanotechnology, which soon you'll be able to share and look at and talk to the scientists about, through to history of science, where you can go around with interactive devices, with PDA systems, so that just for you, you'll have a description of all the exhibits that you can see that have really formed the last 200 years of British science. But above all, is our outreach, where we invite everyone to come and think about science. I'm really privileged to be a patron of Mentor because it stands for the things that I stand for. As well as being director of the Royal Institution, I'm also a neuroscientist. That's to say, I work on the chemistry of the brain in the Department of Pharmacology in Oxford. And I've known for a long time just how sensitive the brain is to having its chemistry manipulated. Let me explain a little bit why this is so important. You as a human being, as opposed to, say, a goldfish, have a unique mind. So even if you're a clone, an identical twin, you will have a unique pattern in your brain of the connections between your very many brain cells. And it's this configuration, this endlessly changing pattern of connections between brain cells that makes you so special. For example, we know that London taxi drivers, because they're using their brains to memorize street names a lot, have a larger area of their brain relating to memory. We also know in another study, for example, of people learning to play the piano, that even after 5 days, areas of the brain relating to their fingers actually becomes stronger and bigger than people who've just stared at a piano for 5 days. So the brilliant thing about being born a human being is that your brain is very sensitive to whatever you do. And like with any exercise, the more you do it, the stronger that part of your body will become. If you don't do it, then it will atrophy. So in this way, from the moment you're born and interacting in your unique trajectory through life, you are personalizing your brain. You are developing a mind, talking about developing a mind. And the building block for this process is the connection between one brain cell and another. And the way that one brain cell communicates with another, the way it uses its connections, is via a little chemical messenger, of which there are many in the brain. Now, the way drugs and alcohol work is by interfering with this process. So you can see that by talking about blowing your mind or losing your mind with drugs and alcohol, that actually might be just what you're doing. And that's why I think it's very important for people to realize that their brains are not fixed. They are not inviolate from what happens. The beauty of being a human being is that you are interacting with the environment in this wonderful two-way street. Everything that happens to you changes your brain connections, and you evaluate what's happened to you in terms of your highly personalized, highly individual brain connections. So this is both good and bad, because on the one hand, it does indeed give you the capacity to be truly individual, but it also makes you very vulnerable to changes that you might make to those connections if you take drugs. Because some drugs will flood the connections with too much chemical messenger, others might deprive it, others might act as imposters and kid the brain into thinking that too much of the chemical messenger has been released. So you can imagine that that would really mess up the most basic workings of your brain. And by virtue of the kind of work that Mentor does, we are able to let people know about this. We're empowering young people so that if they are faced with a decision, they can make that decision from an informed stance. And that's why it's so important. The other reason that the work of Mentor is so important, especially now, is that the 21st century is posing us with new challenges, new strains, new opportunities, but also new threats. And I think that young people nowadays face a life, face a prospect that wouldn't have been even dreamt about in the 20th century when I was growing up. Life is changing in a way that none of us could have thought possible, and I think there are unique issues, unique demands that young people now have to make, which may mean that they feel the need to turn to drugs compared to previous generations, or it may be that because of drugs they see the world in a certain way. It's therefore very important to look at these new challenges and changes that the 21st century is making, and to think of ways in which we can help people face up to those challenges without turning first to drugs and alcohol, but to think of new ways that they can actually make the most of the opportunities and minimise the threats that those technologies are changing. And that's why I welcome these awards so hugely, because I've actually just written a book on identity for the 21st century, because I am very concerned, yet intrigued, and yet fascinated about the opportunities but threats that technology may be posing in the way it shapes our minds, changes our brain connections. And I think that these Champ Awards from Mentor are absolutely fantastic, because they're giving young people the chance to work together, to think imaginatively about what might be happening, and therefore to be on the front foot rather than the back foot. And if you like to mix metaphors, if you're on the front foot, you're not going to sleepwalk into technologies, you're going to be empowered.